In this video tutorial, I'm going to explore how to make a cinemagraph inside of Photoshop. What you're looking at is a cinemagraph, and what that is a sort of magical hybrid, if you will, between photography and video. So in this case, I've got an animated element that's looping, and it loops seamlessly, as well as a static element. And here's another example, and the actual example that we'll be making. But this is also a cinemagraph, and so you'll see that there's an animated component that kind of loops seamlessly over and over again. And ideally, you can't tell when it loops. Where exactly does this loop? So that's some of the secret of this, is to make this loop perfectly. But that's combined with a static element, a static photograph. And these can be really compelling images, to have something that's animated along with something that's static, sort of mixed together in a magical cinemagraph hybrid. Really good for social media content or compelling graphics that might be on the web. And we can export these out as animated GIFs, for example, so that they can live in a web browser, or you could export them out as video. Let's get started actually making ours inside of Photoshop, where I already have this child and I've deleted him from the background with a mask. I'm going to composite him in with my video file. So let's go ahead and create the video file. I'll create a new video or a new document, and the size for that I wanted to be the same as my video file, which I happen to know is 1280 by 720, sort of HD resolution for video, and that's what the resolution was for my video file. So now I need to bring in my video file. To do that, you might think that you would use file import, but the only option there is to import the video frames to layers. That would take every single frame of the video and put it into a layer. I'd have like tons of layers. Not what I want. That is actually not where you import your video. So keep that in mind. Where you want to do this is under the layer menu and then video layers. And so in that case, you can bring a new video layer in from a file. That's what I want. And the file that I have here is this escalator file. So I'm going to bring in that MP4 file into Photoshop, and we can take a look at that particular file. I know it's a video layer because of the video icon on the layer itself. And when I open up my timeline, which I have right here, we can see that there is a timeline with that video. If you can't find your timeline panel, it's under the window menu down here at timeline. You could toggle that open. And this particular video is way too long. It's over 30 seconds long. It's about 35 seconds. I want something much shorter. The other thing is that this has some stuff that would be difficult to loop, like these people walking. What you need to do is have a video that has some kind of potential natural loop in it, ideally. So the escalator really qualifies in that this part happens over and over again. And I've got a lot of neutral frames here in the escalator where there's no one coming down the escalator. And so I could use some of those neutral frames and try and take a little snippet of those that I loop on themselves. Now, if you're shooting your own video for a cinemagraph, consider a couple things. One, ideally you want a video that can kind of loop seamlessly. And so if you know how to make some video magic, you might be able to do that in software other than Photoshop as well, and just bring in the looping video and composite it with some other content. But the other thing that we might do is make sure that when we're shooting our video, we use a tripod, because this never loops. When you try to shoot the video and you're like holding your camera, for example, your hand always shakes. It's almost impossible to get this to loop. So you really need a static, point of view from your camera, something that's on a tripod when you're finding your video source. So this qualifies, and what I want to do is just scrub this here till I get the neutral frames of just the escalator. And I'm going to find a particular frame of the escalator and use a kind of reference point. So what I might do is bring in my rulers, Control R, drag a guide down, and I'm going to have a guide where I want to make it where the stair here is just about to drop behind that guide. So I can see that there's just a tiny bit of the stair above it, and I just need that as a reference here. I'm also kind of looking at how dirty that particular stair is. It'd be nice if it looped kind of on another stair that was similarly. So what I'm going to do now is just grab these frames that I didn't need with all the people walking and just trim those off. But you'll notice I have a few neutral frames in front of what I needed, and that's going to be really important. because I need those neutral frames to overlap ultimately. You'll see what I mean. I need a seamless video. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut this down now to some of the frames that I actually want. And so I can scrub this a little bit further down and have another frame of this video as it's sort of exiting the scene. Right around there seems about perfect. I'm going to go ahead and bring in this other end of the video file. I've got a much shorter clip, which is going to work a lot better for exporting to an animated GIF. We want to make sure that our file size is reasonable, and so you probably only want maybe 3, 4, or 5 seconds of video looping in order to have reasonable file size. I'm going to expand this out just a little bit to see it a little better by clicking on the little zoom mountains here, and what I'll also do is just bring my clip all the way to the beginning here of these frames. Let me just bring this all the way over, drag it over here to the very beginning. So I want my video to be right at the beginning. There we go. And it looks like I got, almost 3 seconds of video. That should be just about perfect for the length that I wanted for this. Okay, so what I need to do is have video that loops seamlessly. And one of the ways to do that is have the beginning and ends be the exact same of your video. So if I play this right now, we can see how it's looping right now by making sure that loop playback is set in the settings. If I play it right now, though, it's going to probably have a real jump. So we notice there's a pretty noticeable sort of jump when the video actually loops. That's what we want to try to avoid, is that really noticeable jump. So I'm going to stop this. To do that, I'm going to duplicate my video layer and have the same video on top of itself. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my playback head sort of at the ends of the video here, and I'm going to sort of match these up, so end to end, so that it goes from one right to the other. So the beginning, the end of one is the beginning of the other, and since they're the same video, the beginning of this one is the exact same as the beginning of the layer below, right? They're the exact same video, so as soon as one ends, we start with the beginning of the other. Then what I'll do is I'm going to overlap some of these frames. So I'm going to go back to my video, which I trimmed down, and I'm going to bring back some of the frames that were ahead of that. So I'm going to have a little bit of overlap. I don't want to get so far back where I start seeing people, but I'm going to have a little bit of overlap here in these frames. So maybe I'll go to there, and then what we can do is bring in the very end of the video so that it actually ends right there. The end of this video is the exact same beginning. So this top one basically ends where this other one begins now, like the one underneath. If we were to play this, we'd see that just immediately goes. Now we're going to jump to that other video, but once we loop, you'll see that it loops perfectly down to this other one. So the jump is right there, but at the end, it just starts where this other one starts, right? The very end of this top one is the very beginning of the bottom one. That's exactly what I want. And then what I can do is I could fade in this one that's underneath so that it's not such a noticeable jump from here to there. Like that part right there is too abrupt. And so what I want to do is fade that in. So to do that, I'm going to toggle open my top video layer, and I can see all the animated things, the options for animation for that. And what I want to do is animate the opacity of that layer. As soon as I click the stopwatch, I get a keyframe at that moment, and I'm going to go ahead and take the opacity of that top layer down to 0. And then I'll go to the end of the timeline, and at the very end of this timeline, I'm going to go ahead and hit the opacity again and bring that all the way up to 100%. So there's going to be a little transition where that fades in over time, somewhat subtly, and ideally it's going to fade in such that we don't really see that happening. There is a part where we get 50% of like the video that's on top and 50% that's underneath, and ideally if these were lined up nicely, we won't really see that. And the idea is that we get some kind of video that has a sort of somewhat seamless loop to it. And so more or less, this is kind of what I wanted. It's a pretty seamless loop where it's better and I don't really see the fade in that much. And so that's working okay. Now, what I want to do is bring in my other content on top of that. So I'm going to minimize my timeline now. I've got those 2 video layers. That's working fine. What I might do here is also have one layer, and I'm going to just hide that guide, control semicolon there to just quick key to hide the guide. Sometimes what I like to do is make a stamp of my video file. So you could do that by using the Control-Alt-Shift-E, and that creates a static image of that video. And I've got that right there. I'm going to use that potentially for some other compositing work. But one of the things that I'm seeing in my video is that there's some changes on the right side that I might not want. Like if we look at that right side, you know, there's some people moving there, and there's some other stuff happening. And it looks like when I brought this other layer in, it's not aligning with my other videos. So let's see what's happening here. I've got to make sure that that is across the same span as my other content and the same length as this other content. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this over to right there so that these are the same length. Okay, anyway, this one's off anyway, but when we look at this there's some flashing stuff there. There's some stuff going on the right side that I don't necessarily want. And so what I could do is use a static image on that side to sort of only get what I like. The only part that I really want moving is this top part. I will say that sometimes what people do in Cinemagraphs is that they'll take a video and they'll take a freeze frame from that video like I just did, and then they'll make that one of the static elements in the video. So there's some part that are animating and something from the video that remains static. So the way that I did that using the sort of stamp, Control-Alt-Shift and E to sort of merge and give myself that stamp, I could have taken a frame from the video and made that my static object. What I really want to do with this though is actually take this static frame that's on top. So, you know, right now with that on, if we play this, of course, we see nothing, right? But what I'm going to do is make that into a mask, and I'm going to mask out the parts of this that I, you know, what I actually don't want to see. And so for the static image, I want to keep all the static stuff on the right side here. All of that I want to be the same, but I want to mask out some of this stuff through the middle. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and just go to my brush, just sort of paint through this. And so, you know, this might be easiest to see if I turn these other layers off, but what you'll see is that I can actually paint in. So I want all of this stuff here to, and let's close the timeline to see this a little bit more, right? I want this is all stuff that I want to see, and probably some of the way that the, you know, that the movement kind of shows up on this side right here. I want that to be present, but maybe I don't necessarily want the sense that that these things are kind of moving. So I'm gonna like take that off. So we'll see which pieces, and I can hit X to swap between my foreground background colors, right? And sort of have some of this that is going to be moving, and some of it that is not in this particular case. And then I can turn my video layers on underneath, and if we take a look at our timeline now, the right side no longer has that motion, but I'm getting sort of all the animation that I want, but I'm not getting that sort of weirdness on the right edge. So that's what I wanted for that. The next thing I'm going to do is create a new layer here for my next piece of content. By default, this is going over to 5 seconds, so I can just bring that in. But inside of that, what I'm going to do is bring over the child that's here. So I need to bring that over. I'm going to right-click, duplicate that layer, and I'm going to bring that into my document here. So now that the kid's in there we go. And I didn't really even need to make a new layer for him. I guess I could have pasted him onto that layer, but I just brought him over. I want to scale him in this environment, and let's make sure that the timeline here is the same. Let's bring that over so that they're bringing it into defaulting at 5 seconds in time. So I'm going to scale the kid down, and because I'm going to scale him, I'm going to go ahead and turn this into a smart object so that I'm non-destructively scaling. We'll convert that into a smart object. Then I can hit Control-T, Control-0 in order to zoom back out, and I'll be able to scale the kid down. I want to constrain the aspect ratio here as I do that, so that the child sort of remains in the right spot. So I kind of want to make sure that he feels like he fits into this scene at about the right scale. He's pretty small, but he's a lot closer to the camera potentially. And I can composite him in where I want him to be within the scene, maybe about right there. And I could go ahead and apply that. So he's going to be one of the static elements as if he had just come off that escalator. We can take a look at our timeline. I'm going to hit my space bar to play that out. We can see sort of what's happening with that. I can zoom in just a little bit on that as well. Let me pause that and zoom in, and we can kind of see our timing here on that. Now, I've got a pretty good cinemagraph as it is, but one of the things that you really need to think about is how your composite works together, what the color spaces of the composite might be. So you might work to make sure that the tonal ranges and the color of these things match. I'm going to do just something simple here in order to maybe have some kind of unifying color to these. So I'm going to stop my video from playing. I'm going to create a new layer, and inside, well, I don't even need a new layer. What I'll do is make a solid color layer. Inside the solid color, he's wearing a jacket there, so it's kind of I figure it maybe is a colder season. I might use like a cooler color to sort of overlay all of my content with. So what I could do is, unify the color space, certainly by saying that they're sharing all of that color. That's way more than I'd want. So I can take the opacity down and have just a little of that color in there. Kind of kills some of the tonal range there. Sometimes that works better if you're using the hue in there, and not, because the hue will not apply to things that don't really have much color anyway. So only those things that have a little color will be affected by hue. And so I could bring down that hue, and have it share some of this, and that will help unite the color space somewhat. It's really desaturating things as I do that. So there's some different ways I might do this. I could also look to, for example, soft light, and see what soft light will add a little contrast back into the scene, but also apply a little of this color. And I like this idea that the child and the escalator are sharing some of the color space. There's some other things I could do to match color, but if you're doing some convincing compositing, obviously you want to look at the tonal range and the color space as well. All right, I now have a successful cinemagraph. So we can play this back and take a look. The only problem I'm having right now is that the color fill, I keep doing this where I've got, I import that at sort of the wrong part of my timeline. So let's make sure that these layers are synced in terms of their timing, and I need to pull the end of that back off. There we go. We could play our cinemagraph to make sure that that's looking as we like. And then what I'm going to do with this is scale it down a little bit, because I want to export this as an animated GIF. And the image size is really probably too big at 1280 by 720. It's a little big, so I'm going to just go 50% of that. 50% would be 640 by 360. I'm going to be satisfied, I think, with that particular scale. So we'll scale this down, and we could take a look at this at 100% now. Now I need to convert the video layers into smart objects in order to do that scale. There we go. Let's take a look at that at 100%. There it is. And let's look at our playback. And sometimes it takes a little while for this render to look good. It's a little out of focus, but once we export this out, it should look just fine. Okay, so now the next step here is to simply export this out. So what we're going to do is use export, save for web, in order to create an animated GIF of our content. So go ahead and choose GIF as your file format, and it's going to take a while for these frames to kind of come together for you, but you can take a look at this. Once I've got it, I could hit the play to preview what that looks like as an animated GIF. You could, adjust the colors of the color table if you're getting a little bit too much posterization. Making it into a GIF reduces the color palette to 8-bit color or less, and so you're gonna have 256 colors in the color palette. And so sometimes thinking about, that's another reason why I might have some unifying colors, so that the colors aren't so crazy posterized, and it's looking okay right here. And so once it's satisfactory, what you can do is hit the save button and save that out. So I'm going to do that here and save my GIF out as an animated GIF. So, all right, so there is the example that I just saved out. I can pop that open and take a look. You can also open this in a web browser if you wanted to, and it would display in a web browser as well. Simply go to a browser and hit Control-O or Command-O on a Mac and grab the GIF, and you could open it within a browser window as well. So here it's operating in a browser, and there's our Cinemagraph for Photoshop. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.